look, I've talked to one company that has a RAG-based solution in production, and then production is more of a marketing tool. Almost everyone else is prototyping with LLMs right now and has like some LLM tiger team that's hacking some stuff together and then testing against different use cases. The next year is going to be all about how do we get it over that hump into production, right? And then start fanning out across organizations to realize productivity and performance gains. And so that's what I'm most excited about.
Welcome, Collective Nation, to another installment of the GenAI Collective podcast, Collective Intelligence. I'm your host, Thomas Joshi, ML researcher at Stanford on the Large Language Model Project Demonstrate, Search, and Predict, former ML engineer, joined by my co-host for today, Pierce, from FPV Ventures, and our guest for today, Brian Raymond, CEO and founder of Unstructured. Unstructured is building the first ETL platform for large language models. Unstructured has emerged as a critical capability in the LLM ecosystem with over 500,000 open source downloads in its first year. Previously, Brian helped build another machine learning company, Primer, serving as president of its federal business. Brian's experience also extends to the IB sector, similar to myself, having worked at Harris Williams, where he executed mergers and acquisitions across industries. While in government, Brian served as the Iraq country director on the National Security Council, advising President Obama and VP President on foreign policy matters concerning Iraq, ISIS, and the Middle East. Brian was also a CIA officer. So with that, Brian, tell us, the stuff that's not on your resume about your education, your prior work experiences, and how that led you to start Unstructured and how it differs from other companies.
Sure. Well, pleasure to be with you here today, and I'm excited for the conversation. To start off, really started off down the path of political science as an undergrad. I grew up where, formative experience for me was 9/11, felt a call to serve and a call for public service. And so majored in political science, worked in politics for a year after undergrad, went back to a PhD program. And it was in that PhD program that I was recruited to go work for the CIA, had the opportunity there to write for the president every day. And it was an incredibly rewarding experience. Spent several years overseas with the CIA, and then eventually moved down into a policymaking role, working for President Obama on the National Security Council, overseeing the formulation and implementation of our foreign policy related to Iraq and ISIS. This is in the 2014, 2015 timeframe. And that's a pretty linear path. But after that, my wife and I, we felt a strong desire to move back to California. We're both natives of Northern California, and was looking for the next chapter. And after completing business school and moving out and taking an initial job in investment banking, found myself at a newly minted Series A startup called PrimerAI, which was doing some really, really interesting work in the realm of natural language processing, but also was serving a lot of customers in the public sector and in the national security space as well. Inquitel was an early investor in Primer, and you had this incredible engineering capability headquartered in San Francisco, but also this incredible mission on the right coast with a lot of customers in Washington, D.C. And at Primer, I had the opportunity to not only go deep on NLP, but also go deep on applications of NLP. We were serving customers not just in the national security space, but also Goldman Sachs, Pfizer, Walmart, and they were making early bets, being early in the transformer revolution, where at the time we were fine-tuning models, orchestrating pipelines, building applications on top of them, and trying to use customer data, and it was difficult. And so a lot of lessons learned from that carried forth to what we're doing today at Unstructured.
Yeah, well, Brian, I'm sure being on the early adopting side of transformers and large language models has definitely brought you some formative lessons here, and we're so excited to hear about those. Gonna change gears super quick. We're big fans of icebreakers in the Collective Nation. So today's icebreaker question, just to get to know you a little bit better, you're hosting a dinner with 3 historical figures from history. So who would you invite to this dinner, and what would be the major topic of conversation?
Great icebreaker, by the way. And my guilty pleasure are spy novels. I like
Mm.
just read them voraciously. I actually, it's not in the App Store right now because I got to update it, but I actually built an app on historical sites related to espionage in DC with like 170 locations and all the history behind it and everything. And so for me, Alan Dulles, Ian Fleming, and then of all people, Roald Dahl, the author of James and the Giant Peach, who was an MI6 officer, lived with Ian Fleming in Georgetown during World War II.
I don't mean to interrupt your story, but I was just trying to grab my copy of Casino Royale that's sitting right over there.
Love it.
So I'm definitely on that same boat.
Here's my best piece of cocktail party trivia, right? And a lot more would come out if we were able to get these historical figures together. 007 actually that moniker came from the zip code of Georgetown there in Washington, D.C. Because there's so much spy activity going on there during World War II. And they just took the last 3 digits of Georgetown zip code, and that became James Bond's moniker.
Interesting. Wow. That's
So maybe if there were, so the 3 figures would be related to
So Alan Dulles, first director of Central Intelligence after Bill Donovan. Ian Fleming, right? And then Roald Dahl, who didn't write spy novels, wrote all sorts of different novels, but was an MI6 agent who roomed with Ian Fleming when he was an MI6 agent during World War II in DC. And so that'd be a fun group to get together.
Yeah, that's
I would kill to be a fly on the wall at this dinner.
you'd probably make some very powerful friends, and learn some cool things there. But cool, yes. So with that, we would love to once we get to know people, and not just in professional sense, but what you're passionate about. Love to kind of exchange ideas on AI in particular. And Unstructured is one of these companies that I've been a big fan of. I've been kind of keeping track of, particularly because of your start in sort of AI for defense and kind of branching out from there as well and doing other of applications. Unstructured just recently released a series of major updates, with the introduction of destination connectors and the significant advancements in table extraction and optical character recognition optimization. Like, how do you anticipate these innovations shaping the future experiences in data processing? Given that there's a long history of work that has been done, at least in the OCR space, and in table extraction, like, what is the contribution there? What challenges or opportunities do you foresee in integrating these features with emerging AI and ML technologies in the industry?
So I think like the fundamental value proposition that we're focused on is how do we enable users to get the right data into their prompt window or their context window, right? At the right time, and nothing more than that's needed. Like at the end of the day, like that's what RAG is. We'll talk a bit more about retrieval augmented generation, but it's all about getting the right data to the model if you're using it as a neural CPU. We view our mission as a little bit more narrowly from that overarching problem statement as being, how do we enable users to take any natural language data that's important to them in any file format, in any document layout, stored anywhere, and allow them to stage that somewhere where a model can make use of it, right? And so that's a tall order, because you have lots of different locations where you can store it, lots of different file types where that natural language data might be stored, and then an infinite number of document layouts. And so the way that we're architecting our tech stack is around that mission statement, around being able to make it turnkey, this data engineering challenge on getting that data to the model, and building up our tech stack in a novel way that it accounts for the heterogeneity that's implicit in like how we as humans and as organizations are generating and storing that natural language data every day.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And so Brian, you've talked about like data quality curation for data. So what are some of the tools that you believe are crucial in ensuring quality data curation?
Yep. We break it down into like at least 3 steps here. So the first step is around just pure file transformation. How do you get to JSON, and are there any artifacts that emerge in that process, and being able to account for that? And so what do I mean there? Say PDF, or you have an image or with text, or you have HTML. In the process of transforming that into JSON, are you generating white spaces, Unicode characters, extra characters, missing characters? The ordering of the document, are you able to render that correctly to align with the natural reading ordering of the document? All of that is required as you're doing that file transformation step, right, in practical terms. The second thing that's really, really important here is, and this is how you get around or at least attack the heterogeneity of the document layout, on this kind of in contrast to an intelligent document processing provider, is around this notion of document elements. So like our atomic unit that we're breaking any file down to is a header, a footer, a title, a subtitle, body text, list, these universal document elements that transcend document layout. And being able to not just do the transformation, but accurately classify small chunks of this natural language text into those document elements, because that's going to be critical as you start to build your chunks to build it back up again for storage in a vector database or for staging for fine tuning. The last thing here is around metadata. And metadata is a challenge for carrying it through, like from the document, carrying it through so it's still discoverable, like role-based access, right? RBAC. When was it versioned? When was it created? Where was it stored? Where did it come from, right? Those sorts of things. But also we're generating metadata. We're classifying the language. We're classifying the document element. We're classifying hierarchy. So this is like section 1, 1.1, 1.1.2, et cetera, and more, so that when it's stored in a vector database or stored in any sort of storage component downstream, it's easy to find. What we're seeing more broadly as an industry is that it's difficult beyond a certain size to use semantic similarity by itself to find the right data. And we're very bullish on the metadata that we're generating around our super clean chunks of text to be able to find exactly what you need and then bring that to the context window, Pierce.
But where does that leave us as an industry if, let's say 2015, there was a lot, post 2015, there's a lot of work being done in semantic search. And then, before that, it was a lot of, text patterning. Yes, there are some limitations with semantic search. Do you, is the vision to do something that kind of marries what we did in the past with modern day tools? There are some people who are just kind of betting the farm on semantic search and just trying to make that technology really great. And if that's the future that we're kind of moving towards, how does Unstructured play into these kind of different paths that the future could unfold? Because because you're an interesting place in the ecosystem, because you have to tailor your services based on kind of ways that the future unfolds kind of downstream, based on, do they go to semantic search? Do they go to maybe a combination of the semantic and rule-based? Do you have a kind of envision of, do you bet on one vision and kind of build tools for that one vision? Or is it kind of, I'll keep it open-ended from there.
For semantic search to maximize the performance of semantic search, you need very, very clean chunks of data to retrieve. Reducing everything down to that atomic level and then building it back up, for example, title down to the end of the body paragraph afterwards, and where we make that possible, right? That ensures better retrieval. However, let's come back to first principles here. It's around how do you enable the user to fetch the right data and bring it back to the context window, right? And you may want to say, okay, for documents created before 2018 and not authored by this person, and that were stored here, here's my prompt. That's great, because you're able to assist, the human knows already what they're looking for, right? To a certain extent, or wants to neck it down a little bit. And you can use natural language query to make use of that metadata in order to be far more efficient about what you're bringing back. Meaning it's not just about the compute cost of the retrieval, but it's about how much noise that you're putting into the context window. and also like how big of a model, how big of a context window you're going to need on all of this, which pertains to total cost of ownership. All of this is
Right.
related to the viability of moving these prototypes that everyone's building right now into production and then scaling them.
Yeah, and I think where my question came from was because of the history of search, you had in these kind of information dense fields such as law or finance, the arisal of search functionality, which was like you have like and operators and or operators. They didn't have these kind of very natural language search text boxes like we had with consumer products, like with Google. You know, you can kind of name the list there. Amazon's product catalog. And what I'm trying to think about is, how does the future unfold there? Like, does the legal field and the finance field and the healthcare field, are they always just stuck with the very terse and kind of structured? I'm looking for these keywords and this keyword or this, and it doesn't flow. It's not natural, and I think that's one of the benefits of kind of these latest advances in search, and at least in language models, is that it allows humans to search for their information in a more natural, flowing way, where they don't feel like they have to go down at the robots level to communicate with it. They can be a human, and the machine can respect them as a human, right?
Totally. I think I don't think we're going back to a world where you're having to write Boolean queries to search a knowledge graph, right? I don't think that we need to go back to that. However, from a business standpoint, you need to have a lot of confidence, and like there's still structured data is still incredibly important, and also creating structure from unstructured data is incredibly important, right? In order to drive business processes, and so having confidence that you're doing that, right, is going to be essential to adoption. And so that's where I think the ergonomics of prompting are probably the most interesting right now, on how do you generate and store the data on the back end, so that it is effortless to grab data, not just doing exploratory prompting, but also to query your data so that you can create structured data sets so that you can go accomplish some sort of business task.
Yes, yeah. And I think, from our project at Stanford, we think a lot about how do we engineer data pipelines, or language model pipelines. And it occurred to me that we actually need way more support for beginners on just managing your PDF document, and how do you collect the data from that, and there's all this. We're kind of focused here later in the kind of the life cycle of a development cycle, and then there's all these tools or gaps that we need to fill earlier on to just clean the data, manage data. And I think that's where Unstructured can really offer a lot of a high value proposition. I mean, I guess kind of moving forward. I mean, you've spoken about how language models will be used for information retrieval and generation, and that's also a vision that we believe in at Stanford in our group. How do you envision Unstructured fitting into retrieval augmented generated pipelines? So there's one aspect of this where there's differing visions in how to build the tools for a RAG. So we have our own thesis. Companies like LangChain and Llama Index have their own thesis, basically more lighter weight, build high integrations with other companies. We have a more flexible, you tell us, it's a declarative, you tell us what you want to do in your language pipeline, and we'll compile that down for you, make it more efficient, make the prompts more efficient as well. How does Unstructured fit into these RAG pipelines with all these varying theses that are playing out as we speak right now?
Everyone has an opinion on this. I like to simplify it into 4 components, right? To get all this working, you have 4 components. You got the model itself, right? Which you're going to take something off the shelf and probably fine tune it, but you got the model itself. You got the retrieval strategy. You got how you're storing your data and how you're pre-processing the data. And the world, everyone's kind of been moving from right to left there. And as you mentioned, Thomas, there's different approaches being tested for how to do that. The way that we think about ourselves, and we hope where we're generating value, is that we're almost Switzerland, and we're sitting to the left of storage. Storage in service of RAG and storage in service of fine tuning or pre-training, and that you can leave unstructured with the confidence that you're not leaving anything on the table in terms of the quality of the data that you're feeding into the model. So we're refining the fuel, that's going to go into this, or we're growing the vegetables. Maybe that's a better one here that are going into it. But then a lot of those micro decisions on the are to the right of the storage and how we're thinking about it. There's going to be different decisions on what you want to do for chunking, for example, or for bring your own embedding model, or for which document elements you want to zero in on. But those are more around just features and functionality on our end, rather than that implying paradigm shifts later downstream. It's all going to be relevant.
So, I mean, maybe you talked to customers earlier on in their development pipeline over here. I mean, are you seeing an emergence of philosophies for fine tuning versus retrieval augmentation? Public sector versus private sector. Within private sector, different types of industries, like more regulated versus less regulated. Are there patterns emerging or theses that are emerging kind of later down the stream, or how people are implementing their LLM pipelines that you're seeing?
I think the startling thing is the uniformity of the sequence that they're proceeding through, which is first use what's in memory in the model, and then understand. And this is kind of like where everyone was at last November or December when they're just asking ChatGPT all sorts of cool stuff. Second thing is like, okay, it's frozen in time, it hallucinates, and it's general. Let's try and give it some data. And so let's take RAG for a spin. Then they realize, this holds a lot of promise, but it's not production grade. I'm going to need to fine tune a model and try that, and then start thinking about all the micro decisions within the RAG pipeline in order to further optimize it. And then as a last resort, pre-train their own foundation model, right? And then rather than using a fine-tuned general model, that sort of 4-step sequence, and not everyone needs to go through all 4. Almost everyone that we're talking to is fitting somewhere into that, maybe pathway of escalation might be a better way to describe it, on taking this technology and then translating into something that's functional for their organization's goals.
So you're saying that it's not necessarily a vision between fine tuning or RAG. It's really more of a development cycle. You kind of progress as your needs change to different use cases. Is that kind of a fair analogy?
Or the expectations, like the level of performance you're needing to squeeze out of this technology, which I think is what, if it's just a hackathon prototype or a sidekick, if you're just building a Clippy, who cares? But if it's something where you're going to actually imbue it throughout your organization to accelerate workflows, then the demands on it are going to be far, far higher, especially from non-technical users.
And I think that's where Unstructured is in a good position, at least strategically, because what we're forced to do downstream is I guess we do have to make bets. Like, we have to have a philosophy and thesis on, like, we think this will happen and we have to build for that. Whereas when you focus on cleaning the data and managing the data and building that future, like, that there's going to be demand no matter what for unstructured data. Like it's not like, oh, we bet this and like it may or may not happen. It's like, it's going to happen. All these visions of the future are may or may not occur, but we'll build the kind of the pipeline into those workflows. I'm curious, was that a purposeful, like, intentional decision, or was it just kind of a natural thing that came out of your prior work?
I wanted to run away from the application layer, was part of it. And then if I'm just being honest here,
that's very cool.
I wanted to go as far away from the application layer as I could. And then 2, this is an ugly problem. This is like, nobody likes working on pre-processing, especially in the data science community. This is like going to the dentist. So
no one gets called a 10x engineer for you know what, I'm just gonna don't forget about the new latest model. I'm gonna take care of our data pipeline. Yeah,
exactly. I don't want to go work on the team, training llama or whatever. I'm gonna go work on pre-processing pipelines. Said no one ever. And so I mean, really, I mean, the light bulb moment for this came from, like, we were 2.5 years into a huge contract at Primer with a big marquee customer. We had not done any fine tuning or pre-training, like no sexy ML. It was all just ugly regexes and Python scripts hard coded to document layouts.
Yes.
And we were like, it was ruining the economics on our deals and just in pro serve hell. And I was like, called like all the usual suspects that you expect in the data integration space, saying, can you help us are you building anything? Is this on your radar at all? And no one wanted anything to do with it. And so I was like, okay, this smells like an opportunity here. And I, before I formed Unstructured, I interviewed 70 data scientists to like confirm that like, this is actually like, how are you actually getting data to Snorkel? How are you getting data to Label Box? How are you getting data to Hugging Face, et cetera? And everyone's like, oh, I'm either just using data that's already clean, or I'm just, having to build my own custom ingestion and pre-processing pipelines. And I was like, okay, done. Like, we're going to go solve this.
So you made,
go ahead. No, that's fascinating. I absolutely love the approach that you take around, or I guess the way that you frame the problem around wanting to go tackle this ugly problem that, that really, maybe doesn't make for the sexiest pitch and doesn't really make for the sexiest, like, technical pitch, but everyone has to do it. And that could be a form of differentiation in and of itself. Right. And I'm just curious about like the way that you think about differentiation. You're obviously Unstructured is not the only company that's doing, I guess, next gen ETL or AI native ETL. Sure. And you've talked on prior podcasts about that, tackling that long tail of more niche document formats. And so what are some of the ways that you feel like you're differentiated in that space, and how do you think that is going to evolve in the coming years?
Before we move on, can we double click one last thing on what he just said on moving away from the application layer and the customer interview? So the customer interviews, that's very similar to Splunk story, which obviously just got acquired for something like 30 billion. If you listen to the founders, they basically, for the first part of their career, they would just be like social mobile local, betting on trends in the industry. And then for Splunk, they took like a year or something, like basically a gap year, and talked to a bunch of people in Silicon Valley, and like this idea of like, data, managing their data logs kept coming up as a problem that no one wanted to solve, like big problem, no one wanted to take care of it. So I think like there's like that, when you were talking about that history, like it just rung a bell that it was very similar to Splunk story. But curious about the application layer, because typically in Silicon Valley, it's been taught that if you own the application layer, you own the customer, and then you can leverage off different infrastructure software companies. But at the end of the day, you manage that relationship, and it's a more enduring relationship. Like, curious why the application layer is something that you wanted to stay away from.
High level customization given different workflows. That's the very difficult thing. Like that's the dirty secret about like margins among like AI companies versus like SaaS companies, is that when you're doing the AI ML stuff, like it's not just the model stuff, it's the workflows. And so you find yourself having all of this work on the front end with front end developers and the data scientists, and then the repeatability is very difficult to establish. And so I was like, let's go be what Oracle was in the 90s, like just baked in at the ground layer, and it's just running all the time. And we're right next to the compute layer.
And you see that with some of the public companies like Palantir, C3AI, their gross margins are like something of like 60%. And if you kind of investigate further, it's because they aren't the pure SaaS players that we had of generations past, like Salesforce, right? Like, and I'm like, it's this idea that people, I think they think that AI is the next software as a service, and I'm sure that there are benefits of the AI business model that weren't in the SaaS business model, but the unit economics that you always had with SaaS, at least in some respects, are not as attractive when you move to a pure kind of what you think of as an AI company.
That's exactly it. That was my lived experience and what I saw from our peers, and so there was that aspect of it, and the folks that have been the most successful, like in my view, are the ones that are able to drive towards like the most general solutions, which are usually at the model layer, not the application layer, or to the left. And so OpenAI is like done an amazing job at that, right? They obviously allow you to fork and fine tune the models, but like work pretty well out of the box, right? And so, but once you start getting into like trying to transfer like UIs from like biotech, pharma to finance to government to CPG, it's tough. It's tough.
Mhm. Yeah. Sorry, Pierce. I'll let you continue the discussion on.
No worries, no worries. Just massively curious about differentiation here and how you think about that.
Let's talk about like in three different buckets, like cost, tech, and then like the ergonomics and like the user experience. Cost. We've done something pretty unusual on our end. We have gone in the spirit of being unsexy kind of underdogs here. We've refactored like everything to be performant on CPUs. Like no matter, like all of our models under the hood are functional on CPUs because nobody wants to blow their cloud compute budget on pre-processing, right? And so it lends itself to just jamming massive volumes of data through us for like fractions of pennies compared to very compute intensive models that are tethered only to GPUs. And so this is where we've made huge investments like over the last 6 months with like a large portion of our data science cadre in the company, because we're over like 30 engineers now on doing this. And so that's a bet that we're making, which is that's going to be really important, especially as GPUs are scarce. The second thing here, like on the underlying technology, we have curated proprietary data sets that are enormous on very long tail of document layouts, on file types and on languages. And then we've actually been pre-training our models from scratch on these. And so under the hood, we have about a half dozen different pipelines. And so we can route files to the most cost-efficient pipeline that's still performant from like an F1 score perspective. And so if we have access to the text, we won't route it to a more expensive model. But we bring everything back together in a unified schema. That's that where you just don't notice the difference. But again, speed and cost there, and that is only achievable from these very, very large data sets that we've curated, and we've actually pre-trained and then fine-tuned on our own stuff. And then third, on like the user experience here, where we're at kind of talking a few minutes ago, and like nobody really wants to spend time doing this. Not only are we getting it into like JSON with metadata, what's going to be rolling out in Q4, in addition to paid APIs in our Azure and AWS marketplaces, which will solve a lot of the privacy challenges that folks are having, and then they won't have to worry about all the dependencies in our containers. But it's a full end-to-end platform where you'll be able to set up schedules like data profiles. So pull from S3 at this periodicity, these types of files like new versions or net new documents. Here's how I want it chunked. Here are the document elements I want removed, for example, like advertisements or things like that, or footnotes. Here's how I want it chunked. Here's the embedding model I want applied, and then this is where I want that data delivered afterwards, and that's just running continuously. And so you're always going to have fresh data in your vector database or in a staging environment for fine-tuning or pre-training. And so you'll be able to set that up across your whole organization, have role-based access controls over that, and that'll be a full end-to-end platform where it'll go from raw to JSON to chunk to vectorized to the location where the architecture can make use of it. And that's something we're extremely excited about, and we're making really good headway towards it. Happy to go deeper on like the file transformation stuff. We had a huge release last week, and we're gonna have a lot more coming on table extraction and some of these other things. But overall, the user experience that we're driving towards is like set it and forget it. It just works, and you're getting fantastic ML ready data that's coming out of it continuously, and you don't need to babysit it.
Yeah, and is that sort of a trend that you've seen in looking at customers? They look at your product and they say, hey, we want to interact with this less. We want to come to unstructured as little as possible. Or is that something that you've sort of been driving towards internally and has led to adoption?
Our story since about February has been really tight cycles of test, prototype, and then iterate, where we put out our Python library, which we're almost at 2 million downloads now of our Python library. And folks said, we love it. It's a giant pain in the ass to deal with. And so, because we're dealing with like this long tail of like everything, right? It's a hairball to deal with. And so like, okay, well, let's get some containers out there. And so hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier. We got containers out and those were super popular, but folks said, I don't even want to deal with hosting the container. Can I just get an API? And so we rolled out the free API in July, and we have an enormous amount of usage. Thank God everything's on CPUs for us because it's free right now. And now it's like, hey, I want to start using sensitive data, and I can't send it to the API, and I don't have the team to host all this stuff or do it. Can I just access it with an Azure AWS environment and just send it back and forth? And then as we move these prototypes into production, I'm going to need a higher level of service. I want this to be run. I don't want to have to like play pinball with my data where I go to unstructured, then I got to figure out how to chunk it. Then I got to send it to an embeddings endpoint. Then I got to send it to Pinecone or something like that. I just want to run it, and I just want to like fire and forget. And so that's been kind of the arc of customer feedback and user feedback that we've been getting over the past year or so.
And I'm really curious. I know this is a little bit philosophical, but extrapolate this trend 10, 20 years. You started off with an SDK, you moved to an API, you moved to being cloud native and just kind of taking more of those roadblocks out of the customer experience. Is that going to keep going in the future? What's the future of the UX here?
On our like coming back to first principles, it's how do you get them like the models, the data that they need when they need it. And so for on our end, what we're thinking about over the next year or so is a lot around a 360 degree view of user data that's important to users. So audio, image, even structured data. How can we be helpful there to deliver that to the model when it's needed? And so some of it's file transformation, some of it's just moving it, some of it is more around techniques on the retrieval side, and thinking about how we can integrate with some of the capabilities there. What needs to get easier for this to drive adoption is that you don't have to have 6, 12, 18-month startup costs to begin interacting with this in a way that's performant. Like we use HubSpot, for example, and we needed to onboard with HubSpot. It took us like 3 or 4 days, to get everything merged in there and stuff like that. And it just works now, right? We don't even think about it. If you think about like Palantir in the late 2000s, it was like a year or 2 years, right? And they've gotten it down a lot faster, and their unit economics have improved. For GenAI more broadly, that's going to be the bigger story. Is cost to value and time to value, and doing everything we can to buy that down, and so that it's effortless to engage with this technology.
And I think in our prior conversations, we've talked about the shift in machine learning from data centrism to model centrism, and then we've gone back to data centrism, and your words, and I'll let you expound. I mean, we had model companies like Hugging Face, and then you had data-centric companies like Snorkel AI and Scale AI that came out. Like, how do you make sense of this kind of shift between data and model? Do you think we'll stay in kind of the data-centric world, or what are your views on that?
I think we just had I don't know if paradigm shift is the right. I would say it's a enormous leap forward in the power of the models, which I think enamored us for several months. And then as folks began to engage more and drive towards adoption, there was a realization that your data is still integral to making this operational, right? And so after like the honeymoon phase was over, and it was like, okay, I really actually want to engage with this. It's like you're back to first principles, which is like everything starts with the data. And Alex Ratner has been like, I think his messaging on this at Snorkel has been spot on over the last several years, that everything starts with the data, and the value that you're going to squeeze from the models, whether or not they're language models or large language models, or computer vision models. It all starts with what you feed it, right? And like on the pre-training side, on the post-graduation, you're going back to law school, on the fine-tuning side, right? Or in the inference side, as just having them running in production. And inference is a little different today than it was like a year ago, right? But yeah, it still matters what you're offering to those models if you're going to squeeze out the performance. And there's a lot of competitive pressure now to actually realize the performance.
Yeah, fascinating. Switching gears a little bit, tribalism. Talk a little bit about this. What does this mean to you in the context of AI? This is something that kind of gets thrown around a lot. So very just curious to hear your thoughts here.
Well, from our kind of like corner of the market, it like what is most acute to us is the tribalism between data scientists and data engineers. We're building data engineering tools for data scientists, and organizationally they're distinct. In terms of internal budgets, they're usually distinct. In terms of the languages they use,
Yes.
to interface with their data, it's different, right? And so I think that the interesting moment that we're at right now is that data scientists need data engineers more than ever, and data engineers need tools to be able to serve data scientists more than ever. And so we're gonna, I think, in a way that we haven't seen over the past decade, those either converge in some cases, or in other cases, non-technical users will become those data engineers who happen to be subject matter experts. Maybe they're not moving data to data warehouses, but they know everything about the language in those in those documents that matter, and they end up curating and maintaining those data sets for the data scientists to utilize. I think we've talked to almost 60 like Fortune 500 companies since the beginning of August, and across our company, and those are like the two different patterns that we're seeing tested within large organizations, which are start moving data engineers to in a direction where they can be more collaborative with data scientists, and other ones where they're just skipping data engineers entirely and creating data engineers out of non-technical subject matter experts. And so that's been fascinating to kind of bear witness to within like the organizations that are consuming this technology.
That is a very hot take. I mean, the specialties of a data engineer, I think of Spark, I think of like Apache, I think about using, Confluent, what kind of similar to what Confluent has built. I think about distributed systems and operating systems expertise. And when I think about a data scientist, I think about basically a stats person that uses a computer. It's like there are more people who have that like statistics and probability background who are leveraged with the computer, and to see those two personas, merge into one, or maybe one becomes the other. Yeah, that will be a very surprising thing to bear witness to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think also I was seeing a little bit of that when I was an ML engineer, where I was on the ML engineering team, but we had a research team, and the research team was doing model development. But what does a research team research when the models are built by OpenAI or Facebook? And what we saw kind of towards the tail end was that they were investigating how a model reacted to a certain input and measuring the output. But at a certain point, that was kind of merging on our territory and kind of seeing how a model performed out in kind of production setting and testing that out. So I'm always this concept of kind of the marriage of these two roles that are quite different kind of coming together is very fascinating.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So kind of wrapping up, last question. what is the AI industry going to look like in 1 year from now?
That's a very hard question. That's like the hardest one today. Back in January and February, you couldn't go a day without reading an article of worrying about the AI industry being an oligopoly, right? Or a monopoly, right? And now you're seeing a swing the other direction in the power of open source alongside this. I think like what really matters is like, how does this benefit folks like, in non-technical roles and organizations? Like if you're working in HR in Illinois in some organization, like, is your job getting better? Are you able to do more of the stuff that you care about and less of the stuff that you don't? And I think that's what this is going to come down to, which is around like, we've gotten like an 80 or 90% solution now, but getting to a 95 or 99% solution where you can actually put it across large organizations to accelerate workflows. That's the tough work that's in front of us right now. But I think there's a lot of exciting work being done there. And look, I've talked to one company that has a RAG-based solution in production, and then production is more of a marketing tool. Almost everyone else is prototyping with LLMs right now and has like some LLM tiger team that's hacking some stuff together and then testing against different use cases. The next year is going to be all about how do we get it over that hump into production, right? And then start fanning out across organizations to realize productivity and performance gains. And so that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one key takeaway that I have from this conversation, and Pierce, would love to hear, what's your one key takeaway? My one key takeaway is kind of what you at least for me, because of my research in retrieval augmentation, is your your notes on where unstructured kind of fits into this vision of metadata management, all these other different problems that have that are kind of to the left of the stuff that I'm working on, and figuring out how we can build our tools to kind of fit into that vision. And then second of all, thinking about like, how do we design our systems for those teams that are kind of progressing on, RAG is good enough for us. Maybe they do fine tuning, and maybe that they stop there, and they progressively kind of go along their journey, and imagining how we envision our users progressing along their journey, and how they develop with our tool as they progress on that journey. Pierce, I'm curious, what is it for you? What is your key takeaway from this conversation?
Yeah, Thomas, I think you covered most of it. Brian, I think you had a series of incredible, unique insights. In founding Unstructured. Whether that's going for a CPU first approach, or tackling this problem that really no one else wants to solve. And I think now it's just it's a question of inflection points. What is the market adoption going to look like in 1 year, and 5 years, and 10 years? And that's of course we don't have crystal balls here and can't predict the future, but just massively respect the work that you've done. You've built a very, very impressive company.
Well, thanks guys. Really appreciate you having me on, and for the conversation. Thank you.
With that, Collective Nation, thank you so much for tuning in, especially if you're listening to this long into the conversation. Thank you to Brian for his time, as he's a very busy startup founder right now. Thank you to Pierce for the excellent questions. And once again, thank you all for tuning in, and hope to stay in touch.